Hello there and welcome back to the Sleep Science. Tonight you're not lying in bed above a stable, sunlit planet. Instead, picture yourself descending a narrow stone staircase, one that creaks with every step but seems endless. The walls are damp, smelling of cool clay and minerals. Air grows heavier with each breath, as though the surface world is sealing itself off behind you. It feels like sinking into the belly of the earth itself, where stories older than empires may still linger. You probably won't survive this journey, at least not in daylight terms. But then again, tonight isn't about daylight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from right now? And what's the local time as your eyelids fight to stay open? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your hand trails along the rough stone wall as the stairs curve deeper, spiraling away from the sunlit fields above. Every sense sharpens in the dark, the faint drip of unseen water, the earthy tang of ancient soil, the way your ears seem to amplify every shuffle of your shoes. You imagine civilizations that might have felt this same descent not as fantasy, but as daily commute. Somewhere in the back of your mind, the usual logic pipes up. Humans evolved under the sun, so surely all great civilizations did too. Fields of grain, rivers swelling with fish, cities basking in the open air. That's the textbook story. But what if the first civilization didn't build towers against the sky, but chambers beneath the soil? What if the deepest roots of culture were literally roots, grown in darkness? Historians still argue whether myths of underground worlds were ever meant to be taken literally. Maybe they were metaphors for death, dreams, or distant afterlives. But as your foot finds another wet stone step, you wonder, why are so many cultures so oddly specific about what lies below? The Greeks pictured Hades as a sprawling subterranean kingdom with guarded gates. The Hopi told of emerging from earlier worlds hidden inside the earth. Even modern urban legends can't resist whispering about mole people, making hidden lives beneath our feet. You pause on the stairs. Above, silence. Below, more silence, only thicker. It's funny, isn't it, how humans fear the dark yet keep imagining civilizations thriving in it. Maybe fear itself is the clue. If people were terrified of tunnels, why keep sketching blueprints for them in their mythology? One fringe theory even claims these tales preserve a memory of actual underground ancestors. But mainstream scholars roll their eyes at that like you. Roll yours at a cousin claiming they saw Bigfoot in Walmart. The chill deepens. You imagine that if there really was an underground civilization, their daily life would have felt like this. Perpetual twilight, the need to listen more than see, the comfort of walls hugging close. You picture torches flickering, shadows stretching across chambers carved with stubborn tools. Unlike the monumental ruins of Egypt or Mesopotamia, no sunlight would have fallen on their achievements. Their brilliance would be hidden in stone and silence, only revealed if you stumble into it like you are now. You step off the stairs into a wide cavern. Moisture glitters faintly on the ceiling like cheap knockoff stars. The ground is uneven, scattered with stones that crunch underfoot. You imagine 1,000 years ago this could have been a meeting hall, a marketplace, or just a chamber where voices rang in eternal echo. But here, the irony, absence is harder to prove than presence. If the first civilization really was underground, erosion and collapse might erase their traces far faster than pyramids exposed to desert sun. Archaeology becomes an exercise in chasing shadows. There's a whisper of air moving through unseen cracks. Maybe it's just ventilation, or maybe, if your sleepy mind indulges the fantasy, it's the breath of something still alive down here. Quirky legends from the 19th century claimed entire hidden nations lived beneath our cities, using secret tunnels to commute. None of those stories hold up under scrutiny, but they reveal a funny human itch. We keep wanting to believe someone is beneath us, not metaphorically, but literally. As you shuffle forward, your body adjusts to the lack of light. You notice your ears stretch for every sound. Your skin tingles at each temperature change. Your mind starts inventing shapes in the dark. You could joke that humans would make terrible bats. Our echolocation skills max out at bumping into the coffee table at 2 a.m. But maybe, given generations underground, we could have evolved differently. Who's to say the first civilization didn't take that path before we ever climbed into the sunlight? One thing is certain. Myths from cultures oceans apart describe rich, structured societies beneath the earth. Whether you call them the Naga of India, the Shambhala seekers of Tibet, or the more pop culture Atlantis in a cave variations, the theme persists. Historians still argue whether these are coincidences of imagination or faint echoes of a shared ancestral memory. Tonight, though, you don't need to choose a side. You just keep walking into the cavern, deeper into the possibility. The ground slopes again, leading to another corridor carved unnaturally smooth. You run your palm along the wall. It's cool, almost polished, as though hands worked it with care. Your breath echoes softly, and for a moment, you feel like you're not the first to pass this way, just the latest guest in a very old hotel. Room service is probably terrible, but the ambience, unmatched. You take another step forward and another. The air feels older, heavier, but oddly comforting. Maybe that's the real hook. The underground isn't just dark, it's womb-like, wrapping you in quiet safety even as it unnerves you. If the first civilization thrived here, maybe they weren't hiding from disaster or sunlight. They were chasing that quiet, eternal embrace. And so you keep going, breath by breath, deeper into their possible world. You keep moving along the corridor until it widens into a chamber shaped like a giant's handprint pressed into stone. Your steps echo and bounce back at you, the sound twisting into strange harmonies. Somewhere in that echo, you remember the stories you've heard, the ones about underground people who may or may not be more than just bedtime tales. The term mole people gets tossed around like a punchline in city folklore. Newspapers from the early 20th century ran sensational pieces about shadowy societies under New York, complete with imagined maps of subway kingdoms. Of course, most of those stories were exaggerations or thinly veiled social commentary. Still, you can't help picturing it. Torchlit banquets below Broadway, secret stairwells behind every manhole cover. A ridiculous fantasy, sure. But then again, what if the jokes are echoes of something older? Cultures long before us spun myths of hidden realms. In India, for example, the ancient texts mention Patala, a netherworld filled with radiant palaces and jeweled gardens. Not grim dungeons, but lush cities protected from the scorching surface. Tibet and Central Asia whisper about Agartha, a legendary kingdom tucked beneath the Himalayas, where enlightened beings supposedly guide human history from their silent halls. Historians still argue whether these tales were purely symbolic or based on some half-remembered reality. Either way, you notice how oddly consistent the theme is. Down equals mystery, and mystery equals civilization. You trail your hand across the stone again, thinking of those radiant palaces. Imagine if the jewels described weren't literal gems, but glimmers of crystal formations deep underground, lit by torch or perhaps bioluminescence. To an ancient traveler stumbling into such a place, it could look exactly like a palace of light. Then the story grows, embroidered over centuries, until it becomes a legend of gods and secret kings. And then there's the Cherokee legend of the Moon-Eyed people, short, pale, sensitive to light, who supposedly lived underground and emerged only at night. Some say they were conquered and disappeared. Others whisper they simply went deeper, leaving no trail. The quirky part: archaeologists have dug up curious stone ruins in Appalachia that don't quite match the known cultures. Coincidence, maybe? Or maybe another dropped thread in this tapestry of underground memory. You pause in the chamber, your breath fogging faintly in the cold. For a moment, you picture a council of these hidden folk sitting cross-legged on the floor, their voices a low hum, deciding whether to interact with the noisy surface people. It's a strangely cozy thought. Secret neighbors who hear every earthquake, every subway, every thunderclap of the surface world, yet keep to themselves out of patience, or perhaps disappointment. The funny thing is, when modern explorers hear about places like Agartha, they usually bring up hollow earth theories, UFO conspiracies, or pulp adventure novels. It's easy to laugh them off, and you probably should. But laughter doesn't erase the persistence of the myth. Why does nearly every culture, from Norse dwarves forging weapons under mountains to Aztec caves of creation, insist that the underworld isn't just where you go when you die, but where you come from? You lean against the wall, the stone cold at your back. Maybe the answer is obvious. Caves are among humanity's oldest homes. Long before skyscrapers and suburbs, people painted animals on cavern ceilings, safe from storms and predators. So of course we imagine the ultimate home, our original civilization, as hidden underground. Historians still argue whether myth simply reflects comfort with caves or something more. You could argue both sides, but right now, the stone beneath your fingers feels persuasive. Some fringe explorers in the 19th century claim to have actually found entrances to these legendary realms. A few even published hand-drawn maps of supposed tunnels stretching from Tibet to the Andes. None of it holds water, of course, but the sheer effort they poured into drawing doorways to imaginary cities is charming. Like kids sketching treasure maps, only with beards and pocket watches. Your ears catch another faint sound, a drip, but rhythmic now, like water echoing down a long, unseen hallway. It feels like an invitation. You imagine following it deeper, past chambers where people once told stories by firelight, their myths slowly hardening into the legends we now dig out of old manuscripts. If they were real, maybe their voices are still vibrating in the stone, waiting for you to lean close enough to hear. And if they were only imagined, well, imagination has its own truth. Humanity has always needed neighbors, whether across the fence or beneath the floorboards. You take a step toward the sound. The chamber swallows your echo whole, and for a moment, you feel like you're walking straight into the breath of the myths themselves. The drip you've been following fades, swallowed by a new sound, the hollow crunch of your footsteps on loose gravel. The tunnel narrows again, forcing you to brush shoulders with the damp stone, and you think about how civilizations above ground crumble so publicly. Rome falls, Babylon is sacked, and historians write entire careers about the ruins left behind. But here in the hush of the earth, you wonder, what if some civilizations didn't collapse outward but folded inward, slipping beneath the surface where eyes couldn't follow? Above, you can picture the ruins of Mesopotamia, those first baked brick ziggurats eroded by desert winds. You imagine archaeologists brushing sand from inscriptions, trying to stitch together fragments of a vanished story. Yet what if those cities didn't vanish? What if their people built two empires, one for daylight, one for shadow, and when droughts or wars struck, they simply abandoned the sunlit one? Historians still argue whether certain sudden cultural disappearances, like the mysterious decline of the Indus Valley civilization, were caused by climate, invasion, or something more elusive. Tonight, in this tunnel, something more elusive sounds suspiciously like a polite way of saying, maybe they just went underground. You duck under a low arch of stone. The ceiling bears faint gouges, marks of tools that scraped, dug, and shaped long before you passed this way. Imagine the labor it would take to build a hidden city, endless rock hauled away, chambers carved smooth, vents engineered for air. The surface may leave us pyramids, but here you'd leave silence as your only monument. No wonder we haven't found much. Absence is a master of disguise. It's a strange trade-off, though. Up above, civilizations earn immortality through visibility. The Parthenon, even shattered, still testifies to Athens. Down here, invisibility is survival, but at the cost of memory. A joke sneaks into your thoughts. If a civilization builds a library underground and nobody finds it, does it still count as history or just a very expensive root cellar? And yet, people have made similar choices in recorded history. Think of the Cappadocians in Turkey, retreating to underground labyrinths like during Kuyu to survive raids. Or the people of Kubur Pedi in Australia, who still live in dugouts to escape the blistering sun. That's not mythology, that's pragmatism. You can squint and imagine those temporary shelters evolving, generation by generation, into entire worlds beneath. You press deeper into the corridor, your breath puffing white in the chill. Somewhere in the dark, you sense the faint echo of footsteps not your own, maybe just the acoustic trick of a long passage. Still, it makes you picture crowds filling this space, traders with baskets, children scampering between chambers, leaders deciding whether to ever return to the surface. Did they hold debates like ours? Do we risk sunlight or stay where it's safe? You almost laugh at the thought of ancient city councils, arguing over torches, the way modern ones argue over parking meters. And then there's the darker possibility. Some civilizations may not have gone underground by choice. Imagine war pressing them down like a lid, forcing them into caverns to escape enemies above. History tells us again and again of people who fled into mountains, forests, deserts to survive. Underground is simply the next step. If survival meant building a kingdom below, maybe they did it, and maybe they decided not to come back up at all. You pause where the corridor splits in two. To the left, the floor slopes steeply down, littered with rubble. To the right, a smoother path stretches into the dark. You think of the metaphor. Every surface ruin is a left-hand path, a story broken and collapsed. But the smoother one, the right-hand path, that's the road of continuity, the hidden legacy no one above knows how to follow. The stone feels warmer here, almost humming with a residual heat. Volcanic activity, or perhaps just your nerves buzzing. Either way, the sensation makes the walls feel alive, like the earth itself remembers being carved open. That fringe theory bubbles up again. The idea that civilizations didn't vanish, they just slipped deeper. Mainstream scholars wave it off with the kind of weary sigh you reserve for someone explaining that Elvis is still alive. And yet, every time an empire disappears without a neat explanation, the thought returns like a stubborn echo. You picture it vividly now, a surface city under siege, torches burning, crops failing. Then instead of scattering into history's graveyard, the people descend. Passageways lead them to vaults already prepared. They lock the doors behind them. The surface crumbles. Archaeologists thousands of years later scratch their heads. Meanwhile, below, life goes on: markets, songs, politics, all unrecorded except in myths and whispers. The right-hand path beckons. You follow it, your footsteps cushioned by dust, and you feel both absurd and exhilarated. On the surface, this is fantasy. But down here, with no sun, no clocks, no evidence either way, fantasy and possibility start to look like twins. The smoother path guides you downward in a long, steady curve, almost like a ramp designed for quiet processions. Eventually, the tunnel breathes you into a wide chamber where the air feels cooler, steadier, more deliberate, as though it's been circulating for centuries through vents you can't see. You pause, and the memory of a real place surfaces. During Kuyu, Turkey's most famous underground city. It's one thing to talk about myths of Agartha or Patala, but Derinkuyu isn't a legend. It's there, carved into volcanic rock, spreading 11 levels deep and large enough to shelter tens of thousands of people. You imagine ducking through its narrow stairwells, squeezing past stone doors the size of millstones, each designed to roll shut like a medieval lock. The engineering alone is astonishing. Wells that reached clean water, ventilation shafts piercing through rock, kitchens, stables, even wineries. Wine, of course. If you're hiding from the world above, you might as well age a good bottle while you wait. Historians still argue whether Derinkuyu was built as a refuge during raids, as temporary housing, or as something more permanent. But standing here in this imagined corridor, you can't help but feel the intent was deeper than survival. The sheer effort, chiseling out mile after mile of chambers, suggests a mindset where underground life wasn't just backup, but part of the plan. You picture families carrying their possessions down narrow stairs, children laughing at the novelty of torchlight dinners, elders teaching stories in echoing halls. For them, it wouldn't have felt like a tomb or a prison, but a home. And when the stone doors rolled shut, the world outside, the scorching sun, the marauding armies, the endless uncertainty, was reduced to silence. Safety wrapped them like the earth's own embrace. You pass through a narrower throat of stone, imagining the same nervous shuffle that people centuries ago must have felt. Derinkuyu's corridors are notoriously tight, shoulders brushing rock, ceilings low enough to make tall visitors stoop. Practical, yes, but also psychological. You'd always feel the rock pressing in, reminding you that you're sheltered but trapped as well. It's a balance between comfort and claustrophobia, and maybe that's why the myths of underground civilizations feel so charged. They're about safety, but also secrecy. One quirky tidbit pops into mind. Early explorers of Derinkuyu noted how the ventilation shafts doubled as communication lines. Drop a pebble in one shaft, and it could be heard several levels down. Imagine children using those like walkie-talkies, whispering secrets through stone while their parents fretted over more serious matters. In a sense, the city wasn't just functional, it was playful. Of course, not all scholars agree on its origins. Some propose it began as smaller storage caves expanded over centuries. Others argue it was a monumental project from the start, coordinated by entire communities. The debate remains unsolved, but the scale is undeniable. And if one such city exists, how many others might lie hidden, undiscovered beneath layers of history? You glance around your chamber now, imagining torchlight flickering on these walls, shadows painting stories in the uneven surfaces. Did underground architects decorate their walls with carvings like their surface counterparts? Or did they prefer plain stone, leaving the beauty to the ingenuity of the architecture itself? You half expect to stumble upon a crude mural of a goat with horns way too large, drawn by some ancient child with a sense of humor that survived even underground. The eerie silence makes you think of how sound must have carried in Derinkuyu. Without wind or traffic, a single cough could echo down corridors like a ghost. Privacy would have been rare. You'd always be aware of neighbors, their conversations bleeding faintly into yours. Civilization underground isn't just about stone and fire. It's about learning to live with the intimacy of constant sound, constant presence. And then you wonder, if Derinkuyu, a place we know existed, could house so many thousands, why not imagine an even older, even deeper civilization? Maybe what we call refuges are really fragments of something larger erased by time. Historians still argue whether the absence of written records proves Derinkuyu was temporary. But absence doesn't prove absence. It only proves silence. You take another step, tracing the thought further. What if Derinkuyu wasn't just a city? What if it was an embassy, one of many outposts for a civilization that mostly stayed hidden, surfacing only when they had to? The idea sounds outrageous, the sort of thing conspiracy theorists scribble on corkboards with red yarn. Yet the air feels too carefully measured, the walls too smooth, the corridors too clever to dismiss as mere accident. Your torch, imaginary though it may be, casts an arc of light across another passageway. You picture a family standing there millennia ago doing the same. They would have felt the same cool air, the same hum of stone, the same reassurance that the world above could collapse and they'd endure. In that moment, you feel strangely connected, not just to them, but to the possibility that they weren't a desperate anomaly. Maybe they were part of a tradition, one stretching further down, further back. And as the corridor bends again, you can't help but think, Derinkuyu isn't just a marvel of archaeology. It's a reminder that civilizations don't always vanish into the air. Sometimes they vanish into the earth. You press onward, deeper into the passage, and soon the stone narrows so much you have to suck in your chest to pass. The tunnel spits you out into a chamber where the darkness feels thicker, velvety, almost tactile against your skin. Your pupils stretch wide, straining, but light doesn't come. In that absolute gloom, the question rises like a whisper. What if darkness itself wasn't an obstacle but a resource? You stand still and listen. Every tiny sound magnifies. The faint drip of water somewhere far off, the shifting gravel under your shoes, the quiet rhythm of your own breathing. In this kind of environment, sight doesn't matter as much. Hearing, touch, even smell become guides. You imagine an entire civilization adapting to this shift, their senses rearranging around what the dark demands. Historians still argue whether the absence of sunlight automatically disqualifies a permanent settlement. No sun, no crops, no chance is the standard logic. But that logic assumes sunlight is the only path to survival. Underground, darkness becomes its own kind of luxury. Protection from storms, from raiders, from the burning unpredictability of the sky. While kingdoms above ground were collapsing with every drought, the people below may have simply shrugged, lit another torch, and carried on. You imagine how daily life would feel. Instead of windows and skylines, people would measure space in echoes, mapping the world with sound. Festivals wouldn't rely on fireworks but on resonant songs bouncing off the walls, voices weaving together into something greater. A quirky detail comes to mind. Some modern speleologists, those cave explorers who practically live in helmets and headlamps, say that spending too long underground makes you lose your sense of time entirely. Hours melt into each other. Days become irrelevant. Imagine that as culture. A civilization not just living in darkness but freed from clocks, building its rituals around rhythm instead of sunrise. The silence wraps closer. Your skin prickles. In the dark, your imagination conjures shapes, perhaps faint bioluminescent fungi tracing outlines on the wall, or glowing minerals flickering like distant constellations. Maybe to the first subterranean builders, that was the point. Why chase a sun when the earth itself offered a different kind of light? Of course, the question of energy nags at you. Fire can only do so much before smoke chokes the air, but maybe that's part of the genius. Derinkuyu had its ventilation shafts. Perhaps more ancient builders had even cleverer ways. Reflective pools doubling as mirrors, mineral oils burning clean, even biological adaptations we can't picture. Historians still argue whether fire alone could have supported large underground populations. Tonight, though, as your breath mingles with the stone's cool exhale, the debate doesn't feel settled. You walk forward with arms outstretched, fingertips grazing the walls, and suddenly you realize how soothing the dark has become. There's no overstimulation, no buzzing neon signs, no constant alerts from a phone. Just you and stone, timeless and patient. It hits you. Darkness isn't emptiness, it's relief. Maybe that was the draw all along. Still, you picture how unnerving it would have been for outsiders. Travelers stumbling upon such a community might describe them as ghostly, pale, maybe even monstrous. That would explain the moon-eyed people legends or the dwarf myths of Norse tales. Quirky exaggerations by surface dwellers trying to describe what long-term darkness does to a body. Pale skin, large pupils, hypersensitive hearing. It's biology dressed up as myth. You chuckle softly at the thought of an ancient merchant returning to the surface and saying, "You won't believe what I saw, people who live with no sun and never get sunburned." Cue centuries of legends, when in reality, those folks just didn't need SPF 50 anymore. The longer you stand here, the more you sense how darkness itself shapes community. Without visual distractions, conversations deepen. Without sunlight dictating schedules, people move at their own rhythms. Festivals might bloom around glowing fungi harvests, or around the full sound of choirs reverberating through halls. Architecture itself would be sculpted by resonance, not by skyline. You're not looking at towers, but at chambers tuned like instruments. And then comes the quiet realization. Maybe darkness isn't a handicap, but a refinement. Surface civilizations glorify visibility, monuments that can be seen from miles away. Underground civilizations would glorify invisibility, mastery of silence, the art of blending into shadow. Their strength lies in being hidden. Their monument is the fact you can't find them. You shuffle further, the floor dipping into another corridor, and you let the darkness fold around you like a blanket. It feels less like danger now, more like a lullaby. If this was your life from birth, you wouldn't miss the sun. You laugh at the very idea that existence required daylight. And so you keep walking, slowly, calmly, deeper into a civilization where the luxury isn't light at all. It's the endless, protective dark. Your hand scrapes gently along the wall, fingertips catching on grooves carved centuries, or perhaps millennia, before your arrival. The tunnel opens into a chamber with a low, arched ceiling, and your imagination immediately rushes toward the question that has nagged at you since the first mention of underground life. How in the world would they have grown food down here? Darkness is cozy, sure. It makes for safety, mystery, even that womb-like comfort. But safety doesn't fill a stomach. Without fields of wheat rippling under sunlight or orchards brimming with apples, how would an underground civilization have thrived? You step deeper into the chamber and imagine it as farmland. Strange farmland, but farmland all the same. One obvious answer leaps to mind. Mushrooms. They don't just tolerate the dark, they love it. Fungi would have been the bread and butter of subterranean cuisine. Or maybe the soup, the stew, the seasoning, and the snack, if you think about it. Entire feasts of earthy flavors, every dish tasting like, well, more mushroom. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In ancient Rome, mushrooms were considered both delicacy and danger, prized for their taste but feared for their poison. Imagine a civilization that went all in, cultivating safe varieties as their cornerstone crop. Mushroom pasta, yes. Mushroom coffee, why not? Mushroom birthday cake, okay, maybe that one's a stretch. Still, mushrooms alone wouldn't have been enough. You imagine reflective systems, polished bronze mirrors catching rare shafts of sunlight and bouncing them deeper underground. The ancient Egyptians already used mirror systems to light tomb corridors during construction. Could underground farmers have borrowed the same idea, stretching sunlight like taffy to coax plants along? Historians still argue whether such methods could sustain crops on a large scale, but the concept is tantalizing. And then there's the possibility of bioluminescence. Certain fungi and insects glow naturally. What if underground engineers learned to amplify that glow, lining garden walls with soft, greenish light to help fragile plants sprout? The science is shaky by our standards, but your mind doesn't care about modern feasibility. Tonight, you're picturing glowing fields swaying in a cavern breeze, like stars that traded sky for soil. You pause and sniff the cool air. It smells faintly metallic like iron and damp moss. In your imagination, the chamber fills with terraces of crops grown in rich compost. Where would that compost come from? Well, the ancients weren't squeamish. Waste had to go somewhere. A clever cycle could turn every scrap into fertilizer. Crops feed the people. Waste feeds the crops. It's less glamorous than gold palaces, but civilization is built on practicality first, glamour second. Your foot scuffs against a flat stone and you glance down. It feels like stepping into a trough. Maybe irrigation, you think. Underground rivers exist everywhere. Hidden streams threading through limestone, aquifers pressed into the dark. An entire civilization could live like fish beside those currents, channeling water into their gardens. In fact, one fringe theory suggests the myth of rivers in the underworld. Styx, Acheron, Lethe, may have started with real subterranean rivers, discovered and mythologized by ancient peoples who wandered too far down. And here, another thought: animals. Goats, chickens, maybe pigs, all stabled underground like at Derinkuyu. You imagine them bleating and clucking in the gloom, used for milk, eggs, and occasional meat. Their heat alone could have warmed chambers, though you also imagine the smell, which might explain why some myths describe the underworld as a place of sulfur and foul air. Civilization has always been 10% glory, 90% dealing with poop. You chuckle at the thought. Picture an underground farmer explaining to their surface cousin, "We don't need sunlight, we've got goat-powered heating and a mushroom casserole that will knock your sandals off." Civilization is nothing if not resourceful. Historians still argue whether any ancient society had the technology to sustain large-scale underground farming. Some dismiss the idea outright, saying the logistics would have been impossible. Yet here in the quiet, with water dripping somewhere in the dark and stone walls humming faintly with age, impossibility feels suspiciously like impatience. After all, humans have always found improbable solutions when survival demanded it. You step further into the imagined fields. In your mind, you see terraces glowing faintly with fungal light, vines stretching toward mirrors reflecting ghostly beams, farmers moving slowly through the dim haze, their voices soft so as not to disturb the delicate balance. Life isn't absent here, it's adapted. It's stubborn. It's thriving in ways that the surface can barely imagine. And as you leave the chamber, squeezing once more into the narrow throat of tunnel, you can almost taste the mushroom stew on your tongue. Nutty, earthy, maybe a little monotonous after a few decades, but sustaining all the same. Civilization, after all, has never been about banquets. It's been about making sure you live long enough to complain about the menu. The air grows warmer as you descend again, a slow shift you don't notice at first, just a slight dampness in your shirt, the faint tingle of humidity clinging to your skin. Then the tunnel bends, and suddenly you're standing before a wide, low cavern that feels alive with heat. The floor pulses with faint warmth, like a sleeping giant under stone blankets. Somewhere in the distance, water sizzles as it kisses hot rock. You've stumbled into the kind of place geologists would call a geothermal pocket. But tonight, it feels more like the furnace room of the first civilization. Heat, pressure, and strange neighbors. This is where your imagination can run wild. You think of early underground dwellers stumbling into vents like this, realizing that warmth could be harnessed. No need for endless firewood, no choking smoke. Just lie close to the Earth's arteries and let it breathe warmth into your chambers. Historians still argue whether ancient peoples could have truly engineered around geothermal energy. But then again, people were boiling eggs in hot springs long before electricity ever showed up. Why not heat an underground bathhouse the same way? You crouch and touch the stone. It's warm, just enough to raise goosebumps along your arm. Imagine whole communities built around this. Kitchens warmed by natural vents, winter nights shrugged off by rock-heated floors. The Romans perfected the hypocaust system, pumping hot air under floors of their villas. If they could do that on the surface, why couldn't an underground civilization simply plug into nature's furnace directly? But there's more than heat down here. The deeper you go, the stranger the neighbors become. Microbes that feast on sulfur, blind shrimp that navigate by touch, even worms that thrive in boiling water. All real, all thriving in places sunlight has never touched. You picture early underground dwellers encountering these creatures, puzzled, maybe horrified, maybe inspired. To them, these beings could easily become spirits, guardians, or even fellow citizens of the deep. A quirky tidbit. In the 1980s, scientists discovered an entire ecosystem thriving 2 miles underground in South Africa, microbes living off radioactive decay of rocks. If life can exist there, the idea of a shadow civilization doesn't sound so far-fetched. You move further into the cavern, the air heavy with the scent of minerals, a tang of sulfur sharp enough to bite your throat. You wonder if underground cultures would have incorporated these strange neighbors into their myths. Blind fish worshipped as messengers, worms considered keepers of wisdom. It wouldn't be the first time humans turned unusual animals into sacred symbols. After all, cats got the job on the surface, and they spend half their lives acting like they know a secret you don't. The pressure deepens too. You feel it in your ears, a soft pop, as though the air itself thickens. Imagine living with that constantly, lungs adapting, hearts growing stronger, bodies subtly reshaping for life in the press of stone. Would surface dwellers even recognize their cousins who'd gone deeper? Historians still argue whether long-term underground adaptation could alter human physiology significantly. Pale skin, large eyes, maybe even shifts in bone density. It's all speculation, but in the glow of this imagined cavern, speculation feels like reality. You pause and picture a market scene here. Steam rising from vent-heated pots, merchants selling baskets of mushrooms, children splashing in shallow thermal pools, elders trading stories about creatures only the dark knows. Civilization isn't always marked by monuments. It's marked by routines, by comfort, by that quiet sense of we're home. Of course, the flip side is danger. Too much heat and the cavern becomes an oven. Too much gas and it becomes a tomb. Living here would have demanded a delicate balance. 1 part engineering, 1 part luck, 1 part sheer stubbornness. But isn't that the formula for every civilization anyway? You chuckle at the thought of a tour guide leading visitors through such a place. And here's our natural hot tub. Yes, it smells like rotten eggs. No, the warranty doesn't cover fainting from sulfur fumes. Even in the ancient world, someone would have had to crack jokes to make the smell bearable. Your feet crunch on the gravel as you leave the cavern's glow of imagined steam. Behind you, the earth still hums, steady and alive. Ahead, the tunnel narrows again, cooler now, but the warmth clings faintly to your skin. You carry it with you like a reminder that the underground isn't barren. It has its own energy, its own life, its own rhythm. Maybe the first civilization didn't just survive down here. They thrived by learning to listen to the Earth's heartbeat. And as you walk on, ears still ringing faintly with pressure, you can almost hear it still. The tunnel narrows again, forcing you to shuffle sideways along a seam of smooth rock. Your fingers trail over it, surprised by the polish. It feels less like erosion and more like intention, stone worked by patient hands. And then the thought slips in. If the first civilization lived underground, what kind of ruins would they leave behind? Would we even recognize them? On the surface, ruins are obvious. Broken temples jutting into the sky, walls half buried in sand, statues staring blankly with weathered eyes. They demand attention. But here in the earth, time plays by different rules. Rock swallows corridors. Water seeps in, deposits minerals, erases carvings. Collapse buries chambers so thoroughly that even if you found them, they'd look like ordinary caves. If they left no ruins, did they exist at all? Historians still argue whether absence of evidence is evidence of absence. The debate sounds like a tongue twister, but it matters. We've built our entire understanding of history on what survives: stone, bone, pottery. But what if a civilization chose invisibility as its monument? Then silence itself becomes their legacy, and our archaeology looks like someone trying to read a book with all the ink erased. You stop and imagine a torchlit hall carved smooth as glass, pillars holding up a roof of solid stone, murals etched into walls. Now imagine 1,000 years passing. 2,000. Water dripping, stone crumbling, ceilings collapsing. Soon it just looks like a cave with a few odd grooves. The archaeologist shrugs, takes a photo, and moves on. Meanwhile, an entire culture is erased by geology's slow broom. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. In 2002, spelunkers in Romania discovered the Muval Cave, sealed for millions of years. Inside, they found an ecosystem completely cut off from the surface, with dozens of new species. If nature can hide an entire biosphere in plain sight, why couldn't human history have its own hidden caverns waiting? You chuckle softly. Imagine archaeologists thousands of years from now finding your apartment after it collapses underground. They'd puzzle over a twisted metal rectangle, debating whether it was a ritual tablet or a dining tray. Spoiler: it was just your laptop. Misinterpretation is inevitable. Now apply that same distortion to potential underground ruins, where stone itself works overtime to erase. No wonder we can't find them. You press onward into a chamber that feels wider, though you can't see it. The air shifts, cooler now, carrying the faintest hint of dust. You think about how memory itself is fragile. Civilizations above ground are immortalized in ruins we trip over. Civilizations below would only survive in whispers, myths of Agartha, of Patala, of Shambhala. The absence of ruins becomes the presence of legend. Maybe myths are their ruins, crumbled not in stone but in story. Still, you can't shake the possibility that traces do exist, misinterpreted, mislabeled, or simply dismissed. Historians still argue whether certain anomalous tunnels found worldwide are natural formations or deliberate designs. A tunnel stretching under Mexico here, a passage in Cappadocia there. Coincidence, perhaps, or maybe breadcrumbs scattered across continents, waiting for someone to see the pattern. The silence deepens, pressing in around you. You feel like you're walking through a library with all the shelves stripped bare. The knowledge was here once, the structure remains, but the pages are gone. That, you realize, might be the ultimate fate of an underground civilization. Not grand ruins, not toppled statues, but the blankness of stone that once held voices. And yet, absence doesn't feel empty. It feels full, pregnant with possibilities. Every smooth wall whispers, "Someone touched me once." Every collapsed ceiling suggests, "Someone walked beneath me once." You can almost hear laughter, argument, music echoing faintly through the silence. You pause to lean against the wall, cheek resting on the cool rock. The stone hums faintly with your own heartbeat. If ruins don't survive, maybe memory does, in the vibration of the earth, in the way stories persist, in the stubborn human habit of imagining neighbors where none are visible. So you walk on, surrounded not by ruins but by their shadows, reminded that sometimes the greatest monuments are the ones hidden so well we can only dream them into being. Your breath fogs faintly as the tunnel grows colder. Each step crunches on frost-coated stone, and the walls glitter with a sheen that could be ice, or just minerals catching what little light your imagination provides. The air feels sharper here, thinner, as though you've wandered not deeper into the earth but sideways into another climate entirely. That's when you realize you're walking beneath ice now. Antarctica hovers in your thoughts like a ghost continent, vast and mostly unknowable. Scientists say 99% of it is covered in ice sheets miles thick, but every so often, stories leak about tunnels, cavities, even entire hidden landscapes beneath the frozen crust. You picture yourself in one of those spaces, a cavern so huge the ceiling disappears into darkness, walls slick with ice older than civilization itself. If the first society sought seclusion, what better place than beneath the coldest, most unreachable desert on Earth? You pause, hearing the faint echo of a drip, water melting, sliding down unseen slopes. Rumors swirl like snowstorms about what's hidden here. Some claim warm geothermal pockets under the ice could harbor life. Others suggest radar scans have revealed geometric shapes, suspiciously straight lines, suspiciously rectangular voids. Historians still argue whether these are natural formations or evidence of something far stranger. The line between geology and conspiracy gets blurry fast. And yet the thought lingers. If you wanted to hide forever, Antarctica is perfect. Remote, inhospitable, covered by a moving blanket that erases all footprints. The surface world could rise, collapse, and reinvent itself a dozen times, and down here, your civilization would remain tucked into icy silence. You shuffle further, your fingers brushing walls slick with condensation. The cold bites at your skin, and you picture inhabitants adapted to this, layered in furs, perhaps pale-skinned, perhaps smaller to conserve heat. Maybe their agriculture chambers glowed with fungi and mirrors, the warmth of thermal vents their only fire. You imagine them moving softly through the chill, whispering so their voices didn't crack the stillness. A quirky tidbit floats up. In the 1970s, Soviet scientists drilling into Antarctica's Lake Vostok, a body of water sealed under ice for millions of years, speculated that undiscovered life might lurk there. If microbes or fish could survive in such isolation, why not entire cultures further down? It's an outrageous thought, but then again, the whole continent feels outrageous, like a stage built for secrets. The deeper you picture it, the more surreal it becomes. Carved tunnels stretching like arteries, chambers domed with ice, light refracting into shimmering rainbows. Imagine a council chamber glowing blue from frozen walls, leaders sitting in silence while the surface world debates whether they exist. Maybe they watch us still, amused, like neighbors who can hear your arguments through paper-thin walls but never bother to introduce themselves. Historians still argue whether the human obsession with hidden Antarctic civilizations says more about history or about us. Maybe we project our longing for mystery onto the last blank spaces of the map. Maybe we can't accept that some places are simply empty. But standing in this imagined cavern, breath frosting in the air, you don't feel emptiness. You feel presence, quiet, heavy, deliberate. You chuckle softly. If an underground Antarctic civilization ever did exist, they'd probably have the best insulation business in history. Come for the secret wisdom, stay for the thermal efficiency. Civilization is survival first, advertising second. The tunnel curves, leading you deeper into the icy silence. Each step echoes longer now, as though the walls are receding, the chamber opening into something vast. You imagine standing on the edge of a frozen underground lake, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting torchlight like a mirror. Above, stalactites of ice hang like chandeliers. Below, perhaps stairways descend into halls carved with precision. You breathe deeply, the cold biting your lungs. The air tastes ancient. If the first civilization truly hid here, then their greatest triumph wasn't engineering or agriculture, it was secrecy. They didn't build monuments to be remembered. They built chambers to be forgotten, and so far they've succeeded. You step forward once more, into a cavern where the silence of ice feels almost like applause. The air shifts again as you climb into a narrower tunnel, this one drier, dustier, carrying the faint smell of old stone instead of ice. The walls press close, and when you finally emerge, it feels like you've stepped into the heart of a cave system beneath rolling hills. The silence here is different, warmer, gentler, as though voices once lingered and never quite faded. You think of the Appalachian Mountains and the whispers that echo through Cherokee tradition, the Moon-Eyed people. Legend says they were short, pale-skinned, with eyes so sensitive to light that they could only emerge at night. They built stone structures, lived in caves, and avoided the sun. Some stories say they were conquered and scattered by the Cherokee. Others hint they simply withdrew into the dark deeper and deeper, until the surface lost all trace of them. Historians still argue whether the Moon-Eyed people were myth, misremembered European explorers, or something more enigmatic. But right now, as you stand in this hushed chamber, it feels like you could hear their whispers still. You walk forward, your footsteps stirring faint echoes, and imagine what it would have been like to meet them. Pale figures stepping cautiously from a cave mouth at twilight, shielding their eyes from even the gentlest moonlight. Their voices soft, their movements deliberate, as though they had practiced invisibility as an art. You'd probably laugh nervously, trying not to stare, the way people do when they meet someone who feels both familiar and impossibly foreign. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. In western North Carolina, there are old stone walls, piled rock structures whose origin is uncertain. Some say they were colonial, some claim they're natural, but a few locals still whisper they were built by the Moon-Eyed people. Archaeologists shake their heads, but the rocks don't answer, and so the mystery lingers. You pause and imagine life underground in Appalachia. Cool limestone caves, rivers threading through the dark, chambers warmed by hidden springs. Families huddled close, children growing pale with each generation, their eyes widening to drink in the smallest glow. To them, the surface might have felt hostile, almost alien. Why risk burning sunlight when the caves offered shelter, food, and secrecy? The myths make them sound fragile, unable to bear the day. But maybe fragility was strength. Living underground requires patience, adaptation, and a quiet resilience the surface rarely rewards. Maybe their retreat wasn't defeat, but choice. To step away from the noise, to embrace the dark, to live unseen. You run your palm along the cave wall, the grit scratching your skin. In the silence, you picture their rituals, low songs reverberating in the stone, perhaps accompanied by drums carved from hollow logs. Music underground isn't just entertainment, it's architecture. Every note bounces, multiplies, becomes a chorus of its own. Their world may have been small in distance, but infinite in sound. Historians still argue whether the Moon-Eyed people were purely metaphorical, an allegory for night, for mystery, for hidden knowledge. But you can't shake the sense that myths this specific don't come from nowhere. Pale, short, nocturnal. It reads like a description, not a dream. And if they did exist, perhaps they weren't alone. Perhaps the Moon-Eyed were just one branch of a deeper tradition, one outpost of a civilization that made the underground its homeland. You chuckle at the idea of one of them wandering into the modern world. Picture someone pale as chalk, blinking against the fluorescent glow of a Walmart, muttering in a language built on echoes. You'd probably assume it was just another night shift worker. Civilization adapts after all. The tunnel continues, carrying you deeper into the imagined Appalachian network. Each step crunches on gravel, the sound bouncing back like faint footsteps behind you. You don't turn around. You know by now that echoes are the only companions here, but a part of you likes to think it's them. The Moon-Eyed, still retreating, still walking just ahead, always out of reach but never entirely gone. And as the path narrows once again, you realize the legend isn't about disappearance at all. It's about survival. Maybe they didn't vanish. Maybe they just kept walking, deeper into chambers like this, until the earth itself became their only witness. The tunnel dips steeply, and your shoes scrape against loose stones that tumble ahead into the dark. You steady yourself with a hand on the wall and realize you're descending into what feels less like a corridor and more like a shaft. The air thickens, tinged with the dusty tang of disturbed earth, and your thoughts drift to the age-old relationship between humans and the underground: mining. Imagine the first civilization not only living beneath the soil but shaping it, carving out tunnels not simply for shelter but for resource. In every recorded history, mining has been the quiet backbone: salt mines, obsidian quarries, gold veins. But what if underground mining wasn't just labor? What if it was life itself? You picture men and women striking rock with stone hammers, sparks flashing briefly like fireflies in the dark. The walls around you seem to carry the memory of those blows, every groove a ghost of effort. Unlike the ruins of palaces, these marks would never be admired. They were simply survival etched into stone. Historians still argue whether early mines in places like Timna Valley in Israel or Rio Tinto in Spain were worked by organized states or smaller tribal groups. But either way, they show us a glimpse of how deep humans were willing to go for what they needed. Now stretch that picture further. Imagine an entire society where every chamber is both home and mine, every strike of the pickaxe doubling as construction and harvest. You crouch to run your fingers along the floor and find a ridge that feels unnaturally straight, like the remnants of a cut groove. Maybe a tool track, maybe just coincidence, but your mind leaps to the idea of buried artifacts: chisels, hammers, baskets hardened into fossil-like relics. The irony, of course, is that mining destroys as much evidence as it creates. A city built underground might erase its own story while building it. A quirky tidbit pops into mind. In the Wieliczka salt mine of Poland, workers not only extracted salt but carved chapels, statues, and chandeliers entirely from the rock. Tourists walk there now, dazzled by underground cathedrals of salt. If miners centuries ago turned their workplace into a wonderland, why couldn't the first underground civilization have done the same on a grander scale? You imagine a chamber lit by oil lamps, walls glistening with crystalline veins, children playing in piles of gleaming ore as casually as kids above played in sand. Mining here wouldn't have been drudgery, it would have been community. Songs would echo against stone, rhythmic strikes punctuating each verse. Work and culture intertwined until the line between survival and ritual blurred. Still, the danger is undeniable. Mines collapse, air grows thin, gases build. You pause, breathing more deliberately, and imagine how fragile life underground must have been. A single misstep, and chambers could crumble. Civilization beneath the earth required not just persistence but engineering genius, ventilation, support, the constant fight against gravity and chemistry. Historians still argue whether the sudden abandonment of some ancient mines reflects exhaustion of resources or disasters too great to recover from. But what if the opposite is true? What if some mines weren't abandoned at all? What if the workers simply went deeper, tunneling beyond reach, building lives so far down that surface history forgot them entirely? You chuckle softly at the thought of explaining this to a modern mining executive. Oh yes, your quarterly reports are fine, but have you considered that your great-great-great-grandparents might have been roommates with an underground philosopher king? That's the fun of this speculation, the overlap of sweat and story, labor and legend. The shaft levels out into another corridor, narrower this time, the walls rougher, less polished. You can almost hear the echo of tools against stone, the low hum of voices passing time. Mining for memory, that's what it feels like. You walking here now, digging not for copper or salt, but for fragments of a civilization that may have mined its own identity into oblivion. And as the dust settles in the silence around you, you can't help but think, maybe the first civilization didn't build monuments to last. Maybe they built tunnels to vanish, leaving only the faintest scratches in stone as their diary. The corridor straightens, and after a few cautious steps you find yourself in a chamber that feels wider than most. The air moves faintly here, brushing against your cheek as if pulled by unseen currents. You tilt your head, listening. Somewhere far off, the sound of moving air repeats itself, an underground draft threading through hidden passages. And suddenly, a thought presses into your mind like a thumbprint in wet clay. What if these tunnels weren't random? What if they were part of a network so vast it resembled a transit map? On the surface, cities are linked by roads, rivers, and trade routes. Beneath, the same principle could have applied. Chambers join not haphazardly but deliberately, weaving entire continents together. You imagine tracing them on parchment, drawing dotted lines under mountains and oceans. A subway map of the ancient world, only with torches instead of trains. Historians still argue whether long tunnel systems found in Europe were natural formations, defensive hideouts, or something stranger. In Bavaria and Austria, for instance, archaeologists uncovered Erdstel, narrow underground tunnels carved by hand, date uncertain. Some stretch for miles, far too long for simple storage or hiding. Their purpose remains a mystery, and you can't help but smile. Mystery is the perfect fuel for tonight. You walk along the chamber's edge, picturing travelers centuries ago stepping into one tunnel in South America and emerging weeks later in the Andes. Another myth places similar passageways under Mongolia, linking sacred mountains. Coincidence, maybe, but the symmetry is too tempting. A quirky tidbit rises. Peruvian lore tells of tunnels under Cusco, some supposedly leading all the way to the old fortress of Sacsayhuaman. Explorers who went searching often came back with tales of getting lost. Some never returned at all. Your footsteps echo as you continue, and you imagine those echoes bouncing down unseen corridors like signals. Maybe the underground had its own postal system, messengers carrying news through a labyrinth far safer than surface roads. Storms, wars, bandits, none of that mattered underground. Here, you traveled wrapped in stone. The idea unsettles you slightly. If such a network existed, it would mean that while surface civilizations rose and fell in isolation, the underground could have been unified, sharing knowledge, food, even philosophies beneath the feet of empires who thought themselves supreme. Historians still argue whether such global coordination was possible in ancient times. But then again, surface archaeology only reveals half the picture. What if the other half lies hidden in bedrock? You pause where two corridors diverge and picture them as lines on a transit map. Take the red line to the mushroom fields, the blue line to the geothermal baths, and don't forget to transfer at Agartha station. The thought makes you chuckle, but then again, why not? Every civilization develops infrastructure. Why should the underground be exempt? The deeper you let yourself imagine, the clearer the picture becomes. Chambers like depots, wells doubling as air shafts and signposts, symbols carved on walls like directional arrows, perhaps even guides who memorized entire labyrinths, living maps whose value rivaled any king. Lose one of them and you might wander for weeks. You brush your hand against the wall and notice how smooth it feels again, as if polished by generations of touch. Maybe these were the signposts, tunnels worn down by centuries of travel, routes too essential to abandon. It's funny how absence becomes evidence. The smoother the stone, the more you feel someone walked here long before you. You think of myths describing hidden highways under the earth, Inca, Hopi, Tibetan, European, all with oddly similar themes. Some say they were meant to link sacred sites. Others insist they sheltered survivors of ancient cataclysms. Historians still argue whether this is cultural coincidence or proof of some shared, lost knowledge. Tonight, walking here, you lean toward the latter. Coincidence only stretches so far. The draft brushes your cheek again, cooler now. It carries a faint hum, almost like wind passing through a flute. You pause, listening. Maybe it's just the earth breathing, or maybe it's the sound of distant corridors connecting, air rushing along a network so vast you could walk for months without touching daylight. And as you continue forward, your own echo keeping you company, you realize that perhaps the underground was never meant to be isolated at all. Perhaps it was always a web, one that still lies beneath us, invisible until you dare to step into the dark and listen. The tunnel narrows, but instead of silence, it greets you with a low hum that seems to vibrate through the stone itself. You pause, pressing your palm flat against the wall. The vibration thrums faintly, almost like the resonance of a bass note that never fades. For a moment, you wonder, what if this wasn't random geology? What if it was communication, carved deliberately into the stone, meant to carry meaning for ears trained to hear? A language you can't speak aloud. That's the thought that curls through your mind as you step deeper. Above ground, we rely on light, on letters etched into parchment, on voices thrown into open air. But underground, where light dies and echoes linger, language could evolve differently. Imagine speech built on resonance, words humming through rock, messages carried like sonar across chambers. Historians still argue whether early humans ever developed large-scale acoustic systems in caves, but we know they experimented. Think of the painted caves of Lascaux in France, those Paleolithic masterpieces. Some researchers believe the locations of the paintings were chosen for their acoustics. Clap or sing in those chambers, and the sound amplifies dramatically, as though the walls themselves are joining in. Now stretch that theory. What if art and language were born together in the dark, sound woven with image, communication impossible to separate from echo? You shuffle forward and the hum deepens. Maybe it's just air moving through cracks, but your mind plays along. Perhaps it's a phrase, repeated endlessly like a cosmic voicemail left by a vanished people. To them, silence wasn't absence, it was canvas. Words could be drawn with vibration. And then there's the visual side. In a world with little light, writing would have to be tactile or luminous. Pictographs etched into stone, grooves designed to be read by fingertips, or symbols painted in phosphorescent minerals, glowing faintly like constellations in the dark. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. In certain caves, ancient markings were found high on ceilings, places so awkward they could only be reached with effort. Why? Some suggest they were meant to be seen in flickering torchlight, images that danced as the fire moved, an early form of animation. Imagine that as language, not fixed letters, but living images that only exist when shadow and flame conspire. You chuckle softly. Surface dwellers would probably dismiss such methods as primitive. But picture an underground child tracing grooves on a wall, learning to read with their hands, or listening to their elders hum phrases into stone, each vibration meaning something specific. It's not primitive at all. It's genius adapted to environment. Historians still argue whether myths of the language of the earth or songs of the deep were symbolic or literal. Maybe both. Cultures like the Hopi or Tibetan traditions speak of sacred chants resonating through caves, awakening energies. To believers, sound wasn't just communication, it was communion. Tonight, in this humming passage, you can almost believe it. You pause again, leaning into the vibration, and for a moment you think you can decipher it. Not words exactly, but intention, steady, patient, enduring. Like the stone itself is whispering, "We were here. We are still here." The thought sends a shiver up your arms, not fear, but recognition. Language doesn't have to be spoken to be understood. A quirky image pops into your head. An underground postal system where instead of stamps and envelopes, you just hum into a wall and wait for the message to ripple through stone to someone miles away. Less efficient than email, sure, but far more poetic. And perhaps that's the point. Communication underground wouldn't be about speed. It would be about depth, resonance, and permanence. Our letters fade, our files corrupt, but vibrations in stone, they could linger for centuries, maybe millennia. As you walk deeper, the hum fades, replaced by silence again. Yet the memory of it clings, like an aftertaste on your ears. You realize the first civilization might not have written history the way we did. Maybe their archives weren't scrolls or monuments, but resonant chambers, each one humming with messages we've long since forgotten how to hear. You stop, close your eyes, and let the silence settle. If you listen hard enough, you almost believe you can still hear it. A language without words, waiting for someone patient enough to lean close and listen. The silence hangs heavy after that hum fades, but it doesn't last. The next chamber you enter smells faintly scorched, like stone kissed by old fire. The walls are blackened, soot streaks etched into grooves as if torches, or something more violent, once burned here. You crouch, fingertips brushing ash that crumbles softly under your touch. It's old, impossibly old, but still clings like the memory of a fight that never ended. And suddenly, a darker thought takes root. Maybe the first civilization didn't retreat underground willingly. Maybe they were driven. The first and final war. That's how your mind frames it as you walk forward, shoes crunching against grit. History on the surface is littered with battles that razed cities and scattered peoples. But what if one war was so devastating, so apocalyptic by ancient standards, that the survivors fled into the only refuge they had, the earth itself? Historians still argue whether sudden collapses, like the late Bronze Age catastrophe around 1200 BCE, were caused by invasion, climate, or plague. But what if such catastrophes weren't just surface phenomena? What if they were echoes of something deeper, a conflict between those who chose the sun and those who chose the dark? You imagine standing here thousands of years ago as flames licked ceilings, weapons clashed in echoing corridors, and the careful silence of an underground civilization shattered into chaos. The chamber feels like a crime scene, though the culprits are long gone. Black soot doesn't care whether it came from cooking fires or burning barricades. It just whispers of fire, of urgency, of loss. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. In the 1940s, archaeologists studying the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro claimed to find skeletons lying in streets as if felled instantly, some with radiation levels higher than expected. Later studies dismissed the radiation as contamination, but conspiracy enthusiasts still whisper about an ancient weapon, a prehistoric apocalypse. It's fringe, yes, but as you walk past soot-streaked walls, you can't help but entertain the echo. Civilizations have always feared ultimate destruction, whether from gods, invaders, or their own inventions. You picture underground warriors holding crude shields, echoes of battle cries bouncing endlessly through the labyrinth. Maybe the fight wasn't over land, but ideology. One group insisting the surface was salvation, the other swearing that survival lay only in shadow. Civil wars are always the most bitter, and this one might have split humanity itself. Historians still argue whether myths of wars of the gods in texts like the Mahabharata were allegory or memory. Chariots flying through the sky, weapons brighter than suns, cities consumed by flame. It reads like mythology to us, but to an ancient scribe it may have been reportage, twisted through centuries of retelling. What if those wars weren't just above ground? What if the fallout chased survivors into tunnels where they built a quieter, hidden existence? You step into another corridor, narrower, and notice long cracks across the ceiling. Collapsed scars. Maybe natural, maybe not. You imagine defenders sealing doors behind them, rolling heavy stones into place, shutting out enemies, or perhaps their own kin. Silence afterward would have been absolute. Victory in such a war wouldn't be triumph, it would be endurance. The winners weren't the strongest, but the ones who could vanish most completely. The thought unsettles you. What if the underground isn't just home, but prison? A civilization forced below, never quite free to return, its mythos forever colored by that exile. That would explain the recurring theme of underworlds as punishment, as realms of the dead. Maybe they weren't imagined as hells, but remembered as prisons. You chuckle faintly because even in the darkest speculation, human stubbornness shines. Imagine one of those exiled leaders telling their people, "Yes, we lost the war. Yes, we live in caves now. But look on the bright side, constant temperature and no mosquitoes." Civilization always finds a silver lining, even if it's painted in soot. The corridor widens again into a cavern where the roof looms unseen. Your torchlight, imaginary but vivid, flickers against jagged scars where stone fell long ago. It feels less like architecture now, more like survival in ruins. Yet that too is civilization, not the glory of what's built, but the persistence of what refuses to die. You stand still, breathing the heavy air, and the thought crystallizes. Maybe the underground wasn't paradise, wasn't plan, wasn't choice. Maybe it was necessity after a final war that burned too hot. And maybe, just maybe, the reason we keep imagining subterranean civilizations is because part of us remembers, dimly, what exile feels like. The air cools again as you leave the scorched chamber behind, and the silence grows thick, almost reverent, like a library that hasn't heard a whisper in centuries. You step carefully, your footfalls softened by dust, and your thoughts slide naturally toward the one archive no soot or collapse can erase: the human body itself. If the first civilization lived underground, would traces of them still linger in us? Genetics in the dust, that's the phrase that floats into your mind as you trail a hand along the wall. Our bones, our blood, our DNA carry stories older than language. Every migration, every adaptation, every catastrophe leaves a fingerprint. Historians still argue whether oral myths about hidden peoples reflect memory or imagination, but geneticists sometimes stumble onto hints that make myths feel oddly plausible. You think of the Neanderthals. For decades, they were painted as brutish cave dwellers, an evolutionary dead end. Then DNA evidence revealed they never vanished entirely. They live on, woven into modern humans. A quirky tidbit: if you've ever blamed allergies or trouble sleeping at high altitude on bad luck, there's a chance you're actually feeling the legacy of Neanderthal genes. The underground could hold a similar secret. Maybe its people never disappeared, just dissolved into us, their subterranean adaptations diluted but not gone. You step into a small alcove, the air stale but calm, and imagine traits that might betray underground ancestry. Pale skin, enlarged pupils, sharper hearing. Maybe even subtle differences in circadian rhythm, people who thrive in night shifts, who feel oddly comfortable in basements, who never quite sync with the 9-to-5 dictated by sunlight. In another context, these quirks are personality. Here, they feel like memory. Historians still argue whether our deep fear of caves comes from danger or from recognition. Maybe we're not afraid of the dark because it's alien. Maybe we're afraid because it's too familiar, because something in our genes remembers when darkness was home. That thought sits heavy as you imagine the first civilization whispering in echoing chambers, their language humming through stone. their bloodlines trickling into surface kin over generations. You chuckle softly. Imagine taking one of those mail-order ancestry tests and receiving the result. Congratulations, you're 12% subterranean. What would the company even put on the map? A dot labeled somewhere under Ohio. It's a funny thought, but not entirely absurd. After all, DNA tests already uncover hidden chapters, forgotten migrations, lost cousins, entire populations once assumed erased. Why not an underground branch? You picture a child of that civilization stepping into daylight for the first time, their pupils shrinking painfully, their skin prickling under the sun. Perhaps they intermarried with surface dwellers, bridging two worlds, each generation less distinct, until the memory faded into myth and the traits became curiosities rather than identities. That's how history often works. The extraordinary becomes ordinary, then disappears entirely. Your footsteps stir dust that swirls lazily in the torchlight of your mind. You pause, thinking about how fragile genetic evidence is. Bones decay, but occasionally, just occasionally, a fragment survives. A tooth in a cave, a scrap of hair in amber. Each one unlocks entire stories. If someday archaeologists uncover skeletal remains far below the surface, bones showing adaptations we can't explain, it would change everything. Suddenly, the first civilization wouldn't just be a bedtime thought experiment. It would be family. And that's the strange part. You already feel a kind of kinship. Maybe it's just the intimacy of walking through imagined tunnels. Or maybe it's the possibility that we don't just descend from sunlit ancestors in plains and valleys, but also from shadowed cousins in the deep. Civilization isn't one straight line. It's a braid, with strands we've lost sight of but still carry. The corridor narrows again, forcing you to duck, and you feel a faint pulse in your own temples, the echo of your heartbeat in stone. It reminds you of what you're carrying inside, blueprints written in code, passed along generation after generation. Maybe somewhere in that code are faint instructions for living underground, waiting like dusty books on forgotten shelves. You step forward and let the thought settle. If the first civilization lived underground, their cities may have crumbled, their stories may have vanished, but their legacy could be hiding in plain sight, in your blood, in your skin, in the way your body stirs when the dark wraps around you. The tunnel dips again, and this time the air feels damp, heavier, like it's been exhaled and inhaled countless times before. You pause, listening. Somewhere in the distance, water trickles softly, a reminder that even here, life finds its way. And then your mind drifts to another question. If creatures adapt to the underground, why not consciousness itself? What would it mean for eyes to evolve without a sky? You step carefully, your shoes crunching on grit, and imagine the inhabitants of this first civilization. Pale skin, yes, that much seems inevitable, but eyes. Maybe not large, moon-bright eyes like the myths suggest. Maybe smaller or even sealed away entirely, replaced by senses more reliable in eternal dark. Think of cave fish in Mexico, completely blind yet thriving. Or the Olm of Slovenia, a pale salamander that can live for a century in pitch black, its eyesight reduced to nothing but faint light detection. To them, the sun isn't missing. It simply never existed. Historians still argue whether long-term adaptation could sculpt humans the same way. Evolution moves slowly, yes, but given enough generations, you could imagine a people who no longer depended on vision at all. Instead, they'd navigate by sound, touch, even vibration. A language of echoes, footsteps, and heartbeats. You pause and test it yourself, clap your hands softly. The sound rebounds, whispering back the contours of the chamber. Crude echolocation, but it works. Now imagine an entire civilization building not around sight, but around this kind of sonar. Cities tuned like instruments, every hallway designed to sing its presence. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. bats aren't the only masters of echolocation. Some blind humans have trained themselves to see by clicking their tongues and listening for echoes. One man reportedly navigates his neighborhood on a bicycle this way. If a single lifetime can adapt so radically, imagine what millennia in underground labyrinths might produce. You press deeper, picturing daily life without eyes. Food gathered by touch, walls carved with grooves to guide hands, songs doubling as maps. Even art would transform. No paintings, but carvings designed to be read with fingertips, sculptures meant to hum when stroked. And in such a world, what would beauty mean? Not colors, not vistas, but textures, harmonies, the shape of silence. The more you imagine it, the less alien it feels. After all, on the surface, we're already obsessed with stars, sunsets, horizons, things we only see because of light. Underground, beauty would simply shift focus. Instead of gazing upward, you'd reach outward, listening, touching, sensing. Maybe it's not less, it's just different. Historians still argue whether myths of moon-eyed people or children of the dark were exaggerations or faint echoes of real adaptation. But you can't help wondering if there are hints even today. People who prefer dim rooms, who thrive at night, who feel overstimulated in daylight. Maybe those quirks are just personality, or maybe they're the faint, diluted whisper of a time when eyes were optional. You chuckle softly at the thought of an underground fashion scene. This season, the hottest look is textured tunics, literally, so your friends can feel the pattern. Surface fashion obsessed with color, underground fashion obsessed with touch. A silly thought, but not without logic. Civilization always finds ways to decorate itself, no matter the medium. The tunnel widens, and you sense vast space around you even without seeing it. You clap softly again. The echo rolls for several seconds, bouncing back in ripples. This could be a gathering hall, you think. Imagine hundreds of people seated here in perfect darkness, listening not to a performance they can see, but to one they can feel. A choir humming in layered harmonics, the walls themselves vibrating with resonance. A culture built on sound would turn every performance into an act of architecture. You breathe deeply, the damp air cool against your lungs. For a moment you close your eyes, not that it makes a difference here, and let your ears do the seeing. The drip of water, the faint pulse of your own heartbeat, the whisper of stone settling. If this were your life from birth, you'd never miss sunlight. You'd never know it existed. And maybe that's the most haunting possibility. The first civilization didn't abandon the sky. They simply never looked up. The ground crunches beneath your steps as the tunnel opens into a chamber where the air is heavy with a faint burnt tang. You pause, rubbing soot from the wall with your fingers. It smears into dark streaks across your skin, proof that fire once lived here. Not the clean, glowing warmth of geothermal vents, but fire born of smoke, ash, and human hands. Civilization underground wasn't all harmony. It was hierarchy, soot, and smoke. You imagine this chamber as a gathering place long ago. Torches wedged into wall niches, braziers belching dark fumes. The ceiling above is scarred black, pitted where smoke gathered and clung. In your mind's eye, the crowd below divides into ranks, leaders close to the warmth, laborers pressed into corners. Even here, in the dark, social structure carves itself into the stone. Historians still argue whether ancient underground sites like Derinkuyu in Turkey had formal social hierarchies or were more egalitarian. Some chambers suggest communal living, while others feel deliberately segmented. Large rooms for elites, narrow tunnels for the rest. Power, it seems, leaves fingerprints even in rock. You take a slow breath, coughing faintly at the phantom smoke. Imagine how suffocating it must have been at times. Fires choking out air, children rubbing watery eyes, arguments erupting over whose family got fresh air nearest the vents. Civilization underground wasn't just a triumph of engineering. It was a constant negotiation with survival. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. In medieval Europe, miners' candles were made of animal fat and burned smoky and foul, yet workers carried them for hours in tight tunnels. Some even trained canaries to detect deadly gases. Imagine the same principle in the ancient underground world. Children watching animals more closely than priests because survival depended on it. You picture divisions forming here, not just from wealth but from breath. Those with better access to clean shafts lived longer, healthier lives. Those without coughed in the shadows. Social hierarchy written not on paper, but in lungs. You can almost hear the mutters of resentment echoing against these stone walls, the beginnings of politics in subterranean chambers. Still, hierarchy breeds ritual. You imagine soot-stained carvings on the wall, perhaps depictions of rulers or guardians. Maybe ceremonies were held here, with torches flaring, shadows painting the ceiling. The leaders declaring themselves chosen by the earth, their soot-darkened faces shining in firelight. The irony is sharp. Power maintained not through sunlight's glory, but through smoke in the dark. Historians still argue whether myths of underworld kings and queens, like Hades and Persephone, reflect abstract beliefs about death or faint memories of real subterranean leadership. Could stories of shadowed rulers be the distorted memory of soot-stained councils deep below? You chuckle at the absurdity of it, picturing a politician campaigning in these conditions. Vote for me. My chamber has the freshest air. Civilization might change costumes, but the scripts stay familiar. Even in caves, someone's always promising better ventilation. The chamber grows quieter as you move on, your footsteps stirring faint echoes. You look back at the blackened ceiling and realize smoke is both survival and scar. It reveals presence but also erases detail. Centuries later, soot is all we see. A civilization's politics and rituals reduced to stains on rock. Yet even those stains whisper. We were here and we argued and we organized. You walk forward into a narrower tunnel, the air fresher, cooler, and you feel the contrast. This is the story of every civilization, above or below. Soot and hierarchy in one chamber, fresh air and possibility in the next. The balance never ends. The tunnel straightens and the cool air sharpens into a draft that seems to pull you forward. After so much time in shadow, you start to wonder, if life below was so carefully crafted, warm chambers, glowing fungi, networks of tunnels, why leave at all? Why climb back into the chaos of the surface? Why leave paradise? You slow your steps, imagining the moment when a subterranean family packed up and rose toward daylight. Was it desperation, curiosity, or something stranger, some call from above they couldn't ignore? Historians still argue whether the underground cities we know, like Kuyu, were ever meant to be permanent. Maybe they were only sanctuaries in times of crisis. But if that's true, why carve them so deep, so intricate, so enduring? Why invest lifetimes into something meant to be temporary? You step into a chamber where the floor slopes upward slightly, almost like a ramp. The symbolism isn't lost on you. Every step upward is a decision. You picture ancient leaders debating here, their voices rising in heated echoes. Stay, and we are safe. Go, and we are free. Civilization has always been built on those crossroads. A quirky tidbit floats up. Some historians believe the mythical story of Plato's Atlantis wasn't about an island at all, but about a culture destroyed, or perhaps displaced, by catastrophe. If so, maybe Atlantis didn't sink into the sea. Maybe it withdrew into the earth, its people deciding the surface wasn't worth rebuilding on. Myths bend easily, but the themes remain. Still, you can imagine reasons for leaving. Underground life is secure, but it's also claustrophobic. The same walls that protect also press in. The same darkness that soothes also blinds. Children may have grown restless, craving horizons. Farmers may have wanted sunlight's power for crops. Maybe paradise wasn't enough. It never is for long. You chuckle softly, thinking of modern parallels. People leave comfortable suburbs for noisy cities, safe jobs for uncertain passions. Humans seem wired to abandon comfort just to see what else is possible. Why would underground life be any different? Even paradise feels like a cage if you never get to leave it. Historians still argue whether mass migrations we see in history, like the sudden spread of agriculture from Mesopotamia, were driven by necessity or by restless exploration. Underground, the same principle may have applied. We've survived here, someone might have said, but what if we could thrive out there? And so, step by hesitant step, they rose. You imagine the first moment their eyes met the sun. Blinding, unbearable, maybe even painful. Some may have recoiled, retreating back below, but others pushed forward, squinting through tears until the light became familiar. Every civilization has its rituals of birth. Maybe this was theirs, a rebirth into the dangerous brilliance of the sky. The chamber narrows again, funneling you upward. You picture a line of travelers climbing slowly, carrying baskets, tools, children. Behind them, the underground glows faintly with the light of torches, a womb of stone they may never return to. Ahead, the unknown blazes with sunlight. It must have felt like betrayal and liberation all at once. You pause, pressing a hand to the wall. The stone feels steady, timeless, as if waiting for them to return. Maybe some did. Maybe the underground and the surface weren't opposites but phases, retreat and return like breath. Still, the question lingers. If paradise was below, why abandon it? And then the simplest answer arrives, as quiet as your own breath. Because even paradise isn't paradise if you're told you can never leave. Civilization underground may have been safety, but civilization above was possibility. The tunnel flattens again, and you notice a subtle change. The air carries a faint tang of metal, and somewhere ahead you hear the rhythmic rumble of machinery. For a second, your mind lurches. You've walked too far into imagination and ended up in something contemporary. You step forward and the sound clarifies. The low, steady grind of a train rolling through the dark. You picture yourself now on a night train, slipping quietly through tunnels beneath the surface world. The carriage rocks gently, fluorescent lights hum overhead, and you watch your reflection in the window flicker between blackness and brief bursts of passing lamps. Civilization above congratulates itself on building subways and metros, yet you can't help but wonder if we're only imitating something older. Maybe the first civilization never left at all. Maybe they're still here, moving just beneath our feet, their networks running parallel to ours. While we commute on steel rails, maybe they walk through hand-carved corridors, torches or luminous fungi guiding their steps. Historians still argue whether myths of hidden peoples are allegory, but the persistence of stories about neighbors below, moon-eyed, pale, whispering, feels like more than coincidence. You lean back in your imaginary train seat, the tunnel lights strobing against your tired eyes. What if every time we extend a subway line, we bump up against their world, brushing close without realizing? A wall sealed, a passage filled in, a rumor of workers hearing voices behind stone. Quirky urban legends often spring up around new construction. In New York, some claim alligators live in sewers. In London, whispers tell of ghost tunnels sealed for reasons never explained. Funny on the surface, but in this context, you can't help but smirk. Maybe the stories are misdirections, the truth stranger still. You close your eyes and listen to the train's hum. The vibration under your feet feels like a reminder. The underground is never empty. Our machines shake the walls, our drills carve, our cables stretch across rock. If someone were living beneath us, they'd know our schedule intimately. Rumbles at 7 a.m., quiet by midnight. They'd hear our world without ever stepping into it. Historians still argue whether oral traditions that describe neighbors below reflect cultural fears or faint memories. But sitting here, rocking with the train, you wonder, what if they're not memories at all? What if they're warnings, whispers from people who brushed against the hidden civilization and tried to put it into words? You chuckle at a ridiculous thought. Maybe they ride the trains with us sometimes, blending in, pale faces tucked behind hoods, eyes avoiding the fluorescent sting. You wouldn't notice. You'd assume they were just another tired commuter. Civilization thrives on anonymity, whether above or below. The train slows, brakes screeching. The flicker of passing lamps halts, replaced by a dim station platform. You picture figures in the shadows beyond the turnstiles, watching silently. Not hostile, just present, waiting. The idea doesn't frighten you, it feels oddly comforting. After all, civilizations aren't always separated by time. Sometimes they're only separated by a few feet of stone. You step off the train, your shoes echoing on the platform tiles, and glance once into the dark of the tunnel beyond. Maybe you'll never see them. Maybe they don't exist. But the hum of the rails, the breath of the tunnels, the endless urban legends, they all conspire to keep the possibility alive. Someone is still down here, listening. And maybe, just maybe, they've been here all along. The platform dissolves behind you as you take another step into the dark. The air grows still again. No rumble of trains, no echo of machinery, only silence, heavy and old. A staircase curls downward, spiraling like a stone helix, and you descend, each step slower than the last. Down the spiral one last time, deeper into thought, deeper into the possibility that the first civilization isn't gone, just hidden further below. Your hand grazes the wall, smooth in some places, rough in others as though worked by generations of touch. You picture thousands of feet before yours, thousands of palms pressing into the same grooves. If myths and whispers are true, then this descent isn't imagination, it's memory. Historians still argue whether humanity's obsession with underworlds reflects primal fear or ancestral knowledge. But fear alone doesn't explain the detail. The glowing palaces of Patala, the guarded gates of Hades, the labyrinthine Agartha. Those stories sound less like metaphors and more like travel guides, half remembered by people who once walked the spiral themselves. You pause on the stairs, listening to the quiet. A drop of water falls somewhere far below, a steady tick against the silence. You imagine chambers still alive down there, filled with soft bioluminescent light, carved murals tracing forgotten languages, voices humming in resonance with stone. Maybe they're not legends. Maybe they're neighbors, quieter, more patient, but still here. A quirky tidbit lingers. In the 1940s, explorers in Mexico claimed to find caves beneath Teotihuacan that mirrored the city above, as if the builders created two worlds, one for the sun, one for the dark. Archaeologists confirmed the tunnels decades later. Reality keeps brushing against myth, and myth keeps refusing to die. You smile faintly in the dark. Perhaps we've been asking the wrong question all along. Not did they exist, but how deep did they go? And if they're still going deeper and deeper, maybe we'll never catch up. The staircase ends at a flat landing, where the tunnel stretches ahead into darkness that feels endless. You stand there, breath steady, eyes adjusting to nothing, and realize that the story doesn't end with discovery. It ends with acceptance. Some mysteries aren't solved, they're lived with, like neighbors you'll never meet but always suspect are there. So you turn inward, letting the quiet wrap you like a blanket, your imagination drifting lower and lower. Maybe the first civilization is still alive, singing in frequencies you can't quite hear, waiting for the day someone listens closely enough to understand. Or maybe they've become the silence itself, folded into the stone, their presence less about bodies and more about echoes. Either way, the spiral has carried you here, to the edge of knowing, the edge of sleep. And as the last step fades into stillness, you can almost hear them breathing beneath your feet. The story slows now, the tunnel stretching further only in your imagination. Each detail softens like a flame dimming as night settles. You're no longer walking, just drifting, carried along by the hum of stone and the echo of forgotten civilizations. The walls lose their edges, the chambers grow hazy, and everything sharp melts into something gentle and slow. Breathe in deeply, feel the cool air fill your chest, and then let it go, just as softly as water dripping in the dark. The underground no longer feels mysterious or ominous. It feels protective, like a cradle holding you steady. The idea of hidden civilizations, of unseen neighbors, of stories whispered through stone, all of it recedes into background comfort, no longer demanding answers, only offering calm curiosity. Imagine lying in one of those chambers now. The stone floor smooth beneath you, the ceiling arching like a sky of shadow. Around you, the air hums faintly, a lullaby of silence and patience. The earth itself feels alive, breathing with you, keeping pace with your heartbeat. You don't need to seek anything further. You don't need to find the first civilization tonight. It's enough to know that if they are there, they are quiet, they are safe, and they are endlessly patient. Let your own patience match theirs. Let your thoughts soften, your breathing lengthen, your body sink as though you too are part of the stone. Whatever the world above is doing, its noise, its speed, its endless urgency, it doesn't reach you here. You are underground now, and in the dark you are safe.